This was a very intimate attack. I mean, using a metal pipe to attack your victims is about as close and personal as it gets.
A brutal quadruple murder out of Iowa comes with a shocking motive. The accused killer wanted a movie made about the crime.
If he's saying that he did it for there to be a movie made about it, then in a sense, he's saying it was premeditated.
Bizarre motive aside, the disturbing facts of the case speak for themselves.
It takes a long time to kill people like that. It's not just like taking a gun to the back of their head. I mean, it took time to do this. You'd think there would be a moment of self-reflection where he would stop, and he didn't, and he did it 4 times.
So, did the defendant suffer a mental break, or is he just a cold-blooded killer?
Like, there was so much rage that was built up in him that it just boiled over into this explosion of violence.
First responders in Linn County, Iowa, arrived to a shocking scene on Wednesday, June 5th, when 3 people were found dead in an outbuilding. A 4th person was in critical condition and immediately flown to the hospital. He later died as a result of his injuries. Investigators soon zeroed in on a suspect in the case, 34-year-old Luke Truesdell of nearby Marion, Iowa. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Daniel Bober says the murder seemed personal.
The victims may not have known each other, but there may have been a connection to the assailant in some way. And what I'm saying when I say intimate and up close and personal is I'm saying this was not, a sniper that took them out from 1,000 meters. This was as up close and personal and getting your hands dirty as it can get. So I feel like there was so much rage that was built up in him that it just boiled over into this explosion of violence. And that's what makes me think that he knew them in some way or felt especially betrayed by them.
Officials identified the victims as 44-year-old Romondus Cooper, 33-year-old Amanda Parker, 26-year-old Keonna Ryan, and 34-year-old Brent Brown. Brown was the person who initially survived but died 2 days later. Investigators say Truesdell admitted to the attack, saying he beat the 4 victims with a metal pipe. And what stands out to me about this case is that as you're talking about it, it's very brutal. I mean, it was a lead pipe. You have to physically beat these people to kill them. So if you
To
do this
death,
with
right?
one person, it wears you out, I'm sure. But he did this 4 times. I mean, that, if nothing else, takes quite a bit of time to go through all of these people. So what could be going through his mind at this point? I mean, you commit one murder, he didn't have remorse and just continued on. What do you think was going on there?
Well, to me, it's either a case where this is someone who's a complete psychopath and absolutely has absolutely no empathy and no remorse and methodically takes them out and wants them to suffer almost in the most sadistic way. Or it's someone who had so much rage that was built up against these people that it just boiled over and there was no control. But again, to your point, it takes a long time to kill people like that. It's not just like taking a gun to the back of their head. I mean, it took time to do this. And for me, I think there would have been a moment, or you would think there would be a moment of self-reflection where he would stop, and he didn't, and he did it 4 times.
So how would investigators determine whether he is, as you said, a true psychopath or whether this was a huge rage-induced incident?
Well, I think we would have to look at his history. Is this someone who has a history of mental illness? Has he committed other crimes? Has he committed other acts of violence? Is he using drugs or alcohol? What is his connection to the victims? So you look at cell phone data. You look at where he lives. Did he come into contact with them previously? These are all things you would look at to determine, 1, what his connection was to them, and 2, what his previous behavior was.
The case takes yet another twist when investigators revealed the alleged motive for the murders. According to court docs, Truesdell told investigators he wanted a movie made about him.
I don't know if that line was out there just to grab attention, like what we're doing right now. But it's sort of almost part and parcel of what's going on in our society right now with Instagram influencers and social media, where people are always looking to up the ante and to become more sensationalistic than they can possibly be and top themselves so that people will watch. Is this someone who, again, felt marginalized in his own life, felt like he was always on the fringes, that no one ever noticed him, and that this was the only way that he could get noticed? Sort of negative attention is better than no attention. It seems a little bit far-fetched that he would go to this length to achieve that type of recognition. But listen, we've seen it before. We've seen people who want their 15 minutes of fame, whether they're, committing a copycat crime. It's possible, but it just seems pretty out there.
And to your point, this is something I've seen in whether it's true crime documentaries or podcasts, people like Ted Bundy, who really wanted to be the center of attention. Once they were caught, kind of reveled in this limelight. So, could that be the case here that he really did want his name out there to be known as this notorious killer?
It could be, but I think Ted Bundy was a little bit different. Ted Bundy enjoyed the cat and mouse game between him and the authorities. He liked the fact that they were stumped by him and that he was going from state to state, changing his MO and confusing them. He fancied himself to be this evil genius that was outsmarting the police, and he got, I believe, a certain rush from that. This might just be someone who, in his mind, thought the more brutal the crime, the more over the top, the more it will get noticed and the more press it will get. It could be something different.
I want to thank Upside for sponsoring this news package. Upside is a free app that gets you cash back on daily essentials like gas, groceries, and dining. When I pump my gas, now I make sure to use Upside when I do. I mean, look at how happy I am. Why not get cash back when you fill up your tank? And yes, this is actually real cash back. It's money you can transfer straight to your bank account. So once you have the app, claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. You pay as usual using a debit or credit card and follow the steps on the app to get paid. It's that easy. As you just saw me do, you can use Upside at places like, Shell, Exxon, Mobil, 7-Eleven, restaurants like Chipotle, Papa John's, Dairy Queen, KFC, Taco Bell, and that's just naming a few. To find out how much you could earn, click on the link in the description to download Upside, or scan the QR code on your screen and use our promo code CRIMENEWS and get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. That's promo code CRIMENEWS for an extra 25 cents back on your first gallon of gas. But if a movie was really the motive in this killing spree, is it possible Truesdell has a fascination with true crime? Would you be surprised if we went into his past and took a look and he's a huge crime junkie? He listens to these podcasts, watch the shows, etc., that maybe he was studying it in some sort of way?
Would not surprise me at all. We've seen that in mass shootings. Very often, mass shooters are inspired to commit their crimes by other mass shooters. But those are a little bit different because those mass shooters are, in a sense, sort of angry suicides. They're people that are sort of at the end of their rope and they're ready to die to do it. So that's a little bit different. But it would not surprise me at all if he was someone that was fascinated by true crime, especially if he made the statement about wanting to have a movie made about it.
What about the specifics of the alleged movie? And there are still a lot of unanswered questions about this movie, whether he's saying, I wanted somebody to portray me in a feature-length film, or whether it was a documentary. Does any of that matter at all?
It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter in the sense that it's not a defense. If he's saying that he did it for there to be a movie made about it, then in a sense, he's saying it was premeditated. This is something that he planned to do. He had a motive in mind. And so I think that would make him, guilty of first degree murder. But again, until we have all the facts, very hard to say.
I also asked Dr. Bober about what this alleged motive could mean if it comes time for a trial. Would that be a unique motive if prosecutors come to a jury trial, let's say, and they present it and say, the motive in this case was that he wanted to have a movie made about him? Is that something you've ever seen before?
I have never seen that before. And I don't know that a jury would buy that. I would think you would need something more. I think you would need some axe to grind or some grudge that he held against these people. And then if you add in the movie motive, maybe it would make sense. But that on its face seems like a little bit of a weak motive. I think there's other ways to get attention besides doing that.
But Dr. Bober says there are other possibilities for a motive than just Truesdell's dream to be in a movie. So let's put that aside, this notion that he potentially wanted to be in a movie or a true crime documentary, whatever it might be. If we're looking for the motive, let's say that that's not part of it. How would investigators determine what a motive would be? Would they have to speak with him? Maybe a psychologist or psychiatrist talk to him? What do you think the next steps are?
So I think the first thing we have to do is establish what his connection was to these victims. And I think, again, you have to look at cell phone records, email, social media, see if they have any friends that are in common. And obviously sitting down and speaking with him and interviewing him and potential psychological testing looking at his psychiatric history. Was he ever admitted to a psychiatric hospital? Did he have a history of violence? Did he have a history of previous violent offenses that he was arrested for or incarcerated for? Was he a user of substances? For example, we know that the violence risk level goes up if people use substances. Was he someone who was able to hold down a job? Or was he someone who was very impulsive and often act before he thought and wasn't able to function in life? These are all things we would need to look at to get a full picture of him.
Being just days away from the brutal murders, Dr. Bober says there's still a lot of investigative work ahead. And as investigators are working on this case, I'm sure they're going to go back into his past, as you've alluded to before. Do you think it's possible or even probable that they go back and find that he maybe has lesser offenses or other instances that could have foreshadowed what happened?
I would find it hard to believe that with this level of violence, that there wasn't previous violence in his past. Now, maybe he was never caught for it. Maybe he was never arrested. Maybe it was never detected. But with this level of violence being so intense, I have to believe that he's committed other violent acts in the past.
Right now, Truesdell faces 4 charges of first-degree murder, meaning prosecutors believe this crime was premeditated. But from the facts that we're looking at as we know right now, what do you think? Was this a psychotic break, or was this premeditated and he really thought this through?
So I think it's, as you said, still very early yet. But again, we are getting more away from this being simply an act of rage where he acted on impulse. And again, the time that it took to take out all 4 people in this manner, sort of the pendulum swings it being more premeditated than an impulse crime. But I guess that remains to be seen.
Dr. Bober says it may be a leap for Truesdell to come up with an excuse for the crime. Do you think that it's possible that the suspect in this case here says, hey, this was actually just self-defense?
Boy, it would be really hard to believe that. Certainly, a skilled defense attorney could bring that up. Again, until we know the connection between him and the victims, it will be very difficult to say that. Now, maybe there was some connection between the victims, and maybe he's going to say, oh, they said they were going to take me out or they were going to attack my family. But again, the way he did it just seemed like it was pretty methodical and it went on way too long for it to have happened impulsively.
But there's another plea Truesdell could enter rather than guilty or not guilty. And if we are taking a closer look at his psyche and investigators do determine something might be off there, so to speak, is it possible that then he could take a guilty plea by reason of mental disease, disorder, or defect, and that's the route that his defense goes?
Well, depending on the jurisdiction, he would really need to show that he did not know the difference between right and wrong. And then we're going to look at things like, were there attempts to conceal the crime? Did he try to hide evidence? Did he do it in a way where he thought he wouldn't be caught? Because these are all what we call sort of consciousness of guilt. I know I'm doing something wrong. And so it really depends on things like that.
Truesdell was arraigned on the 4th murder charge this Monday in Linn County, Iowa. He's now being held in jail there on $4 million cash bail. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.